Welcome everyone to our Crisis Management and Remote Work with Microsoft 365 webinar. With you today, you have myself and Joel Olson. Joel Olson, would you like to give us a quick intro?
Hey, it's great to be on. I feel like this is probably one of the most timely type of sessions where we're really talking about things that have a lot of meaning, and I hope that this event can be one where we can really have some good dialogue with the people who are on with us. It means a lot to me. I mean, we're all hunkered down, working from home, and this topic absolutely is can mean a lot to people who are on, and it's great to be here. Thanks a lot, Ron.
No problem. Thank you. And again, I'm Ron Jones, Director of Modern Workplace at Perficient, and I'll be your, guide for the day. So a little bit about Perficient, and then we'll get into the message of the hour. Over 20 North American locations. We're publicly traded. We, of course, represent our earnings accordingly. So about 600 million last year, about 3,500 valued colleagues, 95% business rate, which we really find to be our number one value when it comes to how we engage with our partners and customers. And of course, just multiple vendors, industries, and others that we really like to serve and serve well. And of course, delivery centers across China, India, and Mexico. Our Microsoft practice is but one of many at Perficient, but we have been Partner of the Year several years in a row, and that goes back to our inception around 1997. We talked about our industry teams such as healthcare and life sciences, financial services, retail, automotive, and others on previous webinars, but overall, we have some differentiators, especially when it comes to Microsoft Teams and some of the Microsoft 365 features. Dedicated OCM practice, as well as a dedicated voice practice for Teams, as well as collaboration, security, and all the other working pieces that sometimes get overlooked when we talk about our team story. Now, of course, as your partner, we're here to help. And I realize that these are tough times. The new normal is very interesting, and everything has been shaken for a lot of us, from our bandwidth and throughput to just our day-to-day, and of course our at-home life and how it's colliding with business. But regardless, when it comes to you supporting your end users and your employees, we're here to help. We talk about digital transformation a lot. I think this is going to force a lot of that. So if you would like to stick around and talk to us about some of your needs, use a Q&A, feel free. We also have an entire campaign around rapid response from Microsoft 365. So whatever your inquiries may be, from virtual consultations and workshops to, let's get ramped up on Teams within 10 days. We also have crisis management communication solutions, which we'll talk about today, as well as the Teams part. And of course, what if we just want to accelerate adoption? All those things are there for us to make sure that as we are all serving as part of that 90% of the American workforce that's forced to stay at home, that we provide a rich experience to employees, and that it doesn't become an inhibitor for us being both productive and, of course, sharing these experiences and collaborating better.
Yeah, it's funny, Ron. I actually was just browsing the news media and social this morning, and I saw a little joke where somebody had posted kind of a poll that was like, what's driving your digital transformation? And it had CEO, CTO, or COVID-19. And, since it was a joke, I had the COVID-19 circle.
Yeah.
But I absolutely see this is pushing digital transformation faster and in more ways. In fact, I was talking to a colleague, a Microsoft employee, who was talking about healthcare, and he says there's a lot of hospitals that he's been to recently. He's never seen faster digital transformation. Companies that were dragging their feet that are now can't get it fast enough, and things just pushing through like never before. It's really an unprecedented time.
Yeah, unfortunately, nothing inspires change like force, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into our agenda a little bit. We'll have a quick introduction and we'll talk about some common phases of crisis communication, and then we'll start to map that back to the Microsoft 365 stack. If you all have been following things as far as how SharePoint, Yammer, Teams, and Stream work, this should be a good refresher and maybe provide some additional insight. Then we'll transition into remote work because that is the topic du jour as far as how we navigate from a crisis into the new normal and the new day to day, remap that to the same tools that we're talking about. We'll have a final note on governance and then have some Q&A. Feel free to leave those comments. We'll have those curated as we go along. So as far as crises go, of course, we know what a crisis is because we're living it right now, right? But really, it's a matter of preparation for everything. And it could be something that's social, right? Like Lance Armstrong. It could be something more impending or at least more widely affecting, like Hurricanes Harvey and Katrina. Or it could be something like COVID-19, where we joke about the internet being the main victim outside of, some of the obvious ones. But regardless, the outcomes of a crisis could be any one of the bullets you see at the bottom. So operational response will break down, stakeholders will not know what's happening. And of course, that causes them to be angry, confused, or just negatively react to the circumstances at hand.
And
Because
I find as well that you really find out a lot about your business and how agile you are. You know, you think about things like the
right,
the blockbuster Netflix kind of paradigm, where it's how quickly can you transform your business? How are you going to impact a change or respond to a crisis that absolutely is changing your business and your ability to change, your ability to pivot, or even like this kind of crisis where it's, hey, we are a business that isn't digital. How do we empower us digitally?
that's right. And for those looking for more information on crisis management from just a general perspective, and even when it gets to managing that crisis and consulting around that, we have an organizational change management practice as well as management consulting. But feel free to browse Jonathan Bernstein's material. He has a lot of good stuff out there that can give you some food for thought. So naturally, the first thing we say is to be prepared. This is the most common thing. Same time, it's the hardest thing to do because often we think it can't happen to us, right? And when we start defining a crisis, which is any situation that is threatening or could threaten to, harm people, property, seriously interrupt business, significantly damage reputation, and or negatively affect or impact your bottom line, that is a wide swath of things, right? That could be anything from, cyber attacks, health scares like we're living through today, natural disasters, as mentioned earlier, regulatory things, scandals, all the way down to terrorist attacks and product recalls and whatnot, which we see in the headlines all the time, which means that one, we can't live on this, in this crystal palace saying it can't happen to us. And the most important thing is that we have to have a plan. We don't have to necessarily drill down into every single possible thing that could happen. It's just a matter of having a structure for addressing it.
Yeah, I've actually been in some regulated businesses. There was a construction company once I was doing some consulting for, and at the beginning of every meeting, they made sure that everybody knew where the exits were, where any, basically crisis-based things were, and it was part of their process of
Exactly.
starting the meeting, was making sure people understood how to deal with it. And I find that there's something to be said about maturity inside of an organization as it relates to preparedness and agility.
Exactly. I've seen the same thing within energy and utilities, and it's very valuable. And at the same time, also sets the tone for, if things do go sideways, which we do not anticipate a lot, but it's just a matter of being prepared.
Absolutely. I've been in meetings where, you see those videos of Bill Gates during the earthquake up in Seattle.
Hmm.
Um, I was in my office, and the earthquake started. The guy across the hall's like, "I've never been in an earthquake. What should I do?" And I was like, "Well, get under your desk or under the doorway." And he bolts down the hallway out the door. He was so freaked out. And it definitely helps for people to know what to do, how to respond to crisis, and making sure your employees understand so that it's not freaking out. In fact, there was a guy in that same incident where he was in the data center, things started to shake, and he starts pushing up against the server rack, and he kind of realized this is not the right place to be standing if this does fall down.
Right. In your server room, that means that you have, space below you and above you, and that's problematic, right?
Absolutely.
Among other things. And I think that goes back to like, what are the different phases, right? We have pre-crisis, so what can we do to help in these particular situations? We anticipate, we become prepared by identifying the things that could affect us. Identifying and training spokespersons is a huge thing, because whenever there's a crisis of any caliber, the first thing that will happen is that the news starts to reach out for comment. And having those messages aligned really helps, because I think that recently we've seen a mix of that, both positive and negative. And this goes all the way down to fortifying our technology investments. During a crisis, of course, it's really about having a plan and bringing the team together, because it's a multifaceted team. It's not just about technology or communications or management. It's really about making all those things work together. Often we will share our company business continuity plans, or at least aspects of it, to make sure that employees know that they're taken care of. And it's not a bad thing to set up an employee toolkit, letting them know, how to communicate, how this will affect them, those kinds of things that just help to reassure confidence. And not to be left out of this is, after the crisis is over, it's not time to stop working. It's then time to reassess, reevaluate, and evolve that crisis plan. And luckily, we all have a tool set that allows us to do that. So let's talk about that tool set, because I think that's the most important piece of this, is that we talk about Microsoft 365, and this conversation does not preclude us from talking about security and your desktop applications and whatnot. But right now, we're really just talking about how do we message out to our employees in a crisis, and what are the different tools that we can use, and making sure we're using the right tool for the right thing. And often this tool set starts with these 4 key workloads. SharePoint being your hub for information, and using it to centralize all your information into one resource. And that goes from corporate to regional and all the way down to the individual employee.
And let me just
Sure.
add on as well. I think that people, as it relates to Teams, SharePoint, Yammer, and Stream, and so on, if you, as the person who's deploying it, are confused about what to use when, your users are obviously going to be confused about what to use when. If you really can understand the differences and can communicate those to your users, and especially how you effectively use them in a crisis, it can really help for and these tools, obviously integration is a real key, but in terms of where do people go for news, how do you integrate that news into the tools, where can people go to ask questions? Yammer's fantastic with the new Q&A stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding communities and kind of quick action. And then obviously as well, the videos, and being able to get the executives on a video stream, super powerful. That executive engagement, it can actually really help the entire organization help calm down, because they can see where leadership is sharing a vision or sharing what's going on. And sessions like Ask Me Anything can really help to capture and spread messages like FAQs with a chatbot and so on. But these tools are absolutely the beginning and kind of foundation of your messaging communication strategy, and as well, even that ability to get feedback from your employees.
That's right, because just because we have a plan doesn't mean it's a good one, or doesn't mean that it can't be improved. right? So a lot of that comes into listening to the people who that plan affects and making sure that there aren't some areas where we can quickly improve to get better value. I mean, those Ask Me Anything sessions, using Stream and Yammer are really productive for getting the voice of the people out there, and of course reporting that back. Because it's one thing to communicate to all employees in a top-down fashion. It's another thing to provide more relevant content to all the different groups that you have, such as regional areas, which are really concerned more about things that are happening in their geography. Because if you're an international organization, it's great that we have a central message coming from corporate, but it may be even more tangible to you when you just want to know about things that are happening in the US, or at the very least, you want to drill down into that versus APAC, EMEA, and other places. And I think the relevance just goes all the way back down to the employee as you start to hack down this hierarchy, right? Because you have entire department messages that need to go out. You have cross-functional teams that need to be communicated with. And in those cases, having your individual SharePoint sites that are hubs back into the overall corporate message really helps you to move forward on those, and inserting your Yammer Q&As into those areas, because a lot of this, to Joel's point a second ago, is really about reuse. Just because a video is in Stream, it doesn't mean that it can't pop up in several different places in order to get your message out and to make sure that everyone's informed and feeling safe and well educated.
Yeah. And even that all employee broadcast kind of message doesn't preclude all the way down the pyramid where we're talking about, well, what are those individual tasks that employees need to do as it relates to regulations, or whether it relates to training. It's very effective for managers to be able to work with a small set of employees. And so you essentially, it gets very tactical when you get down to that level versus the broad awareness type messages that may go out. But that doesn't preclude you from being able to even have that executive level engagement where messages are being shared and the vision and strategy goes out, and then it gets tactical as it works its way down.
That's right. And just to kind of double down on that is, one of the most important levels for people to communicate, and one of the ones that gets overlooked the most, is the coordination between managers and employees. And there are tools out there such as the Teams manager app templates that are out there, and the manager framework, which, these are all different for each organization. But when it comes down to it, your middle management layer really does a lot of the communication back to the employee. And that is often where you can win or lose when it comes to the things that we talk about when it comes to keeping people informed and well educated.
Yeah. And what's interesting as well is that idea of choice. Like, individuals have the choice of what communication tools to use, but what we need is a place where there is that rhythm of the business that's happening. Because your individual managers may choose to use Trello or Planner and so on for how they organize their teams. But the more you can actually get it from a consistency perspective as people move across the organization, a lot of that adoption is really key, so they can actually see the value of the platforms that that IT has essentially empowered the business with.
Exactly. So I'm going to move forward and talk about each one of these. We may go through this a little bit expeditiously here, but we mentioned Yammer a lot. We've moved from individual Yammer groups to now Yammer communities. I think that represents the real activity that you want to have from those. But keep in mind that this is just a channel to drive you to your central information source. We've seen some organizations really take off with Yammer and use it as its collaboration platform, which I don't necessarily totally agree with, but really it's situational. And just like every football team you see out there, each one has a different mix of players and tools that allow them to be successful. So if that is the outcome, then have at it, right? It's really just a matter of having the right tool for your organization at the right time. And always you want to marry up Yammer with video and some of those other pieces to drive conversations around those updates. Of course, those updates can come from a multitude of places and be driven from a multitude of channels. And while you are drawing people back to hopefully a SharePoint site or some site of some nature that has all of your centralized information in one place. You also can do that from Microsoft Teams, either by reusing that Yammer community that we talked about and the tab that you can have for that, or using the individual tabs to provide even more information via your org-wide channels within Teams, or your org-wide teams rather. Just one warning, of course, while Teams does provide a rich surface for collaboration, and you can use it as a platform for moving forward, you want to be mindful of the way that it works versus Yammer, because there are some distinct advantages to using one over the other. Even if you don't have an organization of 5,000 users, it does not mean that suddenly we want to use Teams as a Yammer replacement. Make sure that you do a little bit of schooling as far as how popularity of posts are concerned. How can I use it to as a channel to move users from one source to the other? Those kinds of things become super important, because it's very easy to get drowned in a flurry of activity in Teams versus the way that Yammer works, which really promotes everything to the top versus the bottom.
Yeah, I find that Yammer, if we kind of focus on that being for communities like you suggested, and then using Teams on the things that are more focused on work getting done, where Yammer is more of the work in the open, kind of being able to share ideas, and more of the community type of things, like social type of experiences. People kind of sharing ideas and things like that, where work gets done in Teams. It should be very action oriented. These are people who rely on each other, where in Yammer, it's a social platform where you can kind of get to know people that you don't know otherwise, and asking questions in the open. Communities that are much more public, where people can join and leave based on interest, and get involved based on interest, those interest-based communities. So I think from an action perspective, this idea of driving kind of a crisis management task force would be a team site, but where people are asking questions about coronavirus, or asking about the work from home policies, where they don't know who's going to answer. Those open kind of Q&A type places based on topics would make great Yammer communities.
That's right. And there are some cases that start to pollute a little bit of that when it comes to like communities of practice, right? Because as a consultancy, for instance, we have a wide variety of folks, from people who just do enterprise voice to collaboration solutions within Teams to organizational change management and other places. And it's easy to get segmented out of some conversations and then want to reach back out to folks outside of those teams that you have structured. So Yammer, from a practitioner perspective, can be used for that as well. So, I mean, just talk to us. We can definitely help you work through some of those challenges, because it is complicated and we understand. There's a lot of nuance to it. One thing that has definitely been nuanced over the years, I think, Joel, has been SharePoint and its use, right? I think that for the most part, the communication use cases have not changed, from intranet to microsites, and of course, a crisis management site like what you're seeing on the side here. That's really where it starts to shine. I realize that SharePoint is more pervasive now, because now it's like your storage for all documents and all content. But when it comes down to it, you can easily roll out one of these sites very quickly. And one of the solutions that we've started to engage with our customers on is just something like that, where we're bringing the different working pieces that we talked about to the forefront, like a Yammer conversation and community for communication around COVID-19, making sure we have news through our hero and text areas and news. And then, of course, bringing in official content from outside the organization, which is just as important, to make sure you have information from the CDC emergency accounts, the World Health Organization, and others. And as you start going down that pyramid that we showed a second ago of like regional updates, things like that, you can easily have subsites with very specific regional information and official regional bodies, as well as integrations into Power BI for dashboarding and other reports that are out there.
Yeah, and in fact, I would even suggest these regional locations make great hubs as well. So being able to roll up what's happening on these tactical teams.
That's right.
can roll up in a hub where, as an example, there's different responses in different parts of the world. So being able to have these regional hubs where they can have their news that may not necessarily be the organization-wide news, but some very specific local news. Those communication sites and some templates based on crisis can really help you to be able to have these destinations built fairly quickly and be able to communicate to those people who really want to know not just what's happening at an organization level, but what's happening on the ground, specific to your buildings, open closures. I really love some of the status related stuff where people can say, I'm in, I'm out, and understanding who's going to be covering what issues and getting quite tactical.
That's right. And each organization is going to have its own hierarchy, but that is definitely a good recommendation. And speaking of, just keeping in mind the user experience and the employee experience, there are two templates that really help you when it comes to maintaining that. One is the crisis communication app template, which is a power app that allows you to conduct a few different things. One, share news to your employees. Two, verify the safety of your employees. And three, of course, communicating common information to everyone. And once you have all this information, like I said, this is a lot about reuse. So then you can start looking at the Crisis FAQ app or your FAQ apps that you may already own and making sure that some of that information is surfaced within these different areas, because just because you have one hub and it seems very clear to your users where to go, you may want to have a few different avenues just in case everyone's not on the know. And of course, you're going to communicate via multiple channels, so you're going to make sure that all this stuff is consistent and that you're keying off the right information.
Yeah, and really understanding this Power Platform is really your no-code, low-code kind of solution to integrating with those platforms we talked about.
Right.
So as an example, we talk about people's status and being able to say, hey, who's working or who's got this or that. Those windows and hours, that app is essentially updating a list that's in SharePoint, as an example, and having that dashboard in Power BI that could show what's happening, and being able to share information across the company. Those nice dashboards live in Teams, but they're built with Power BI. So essentially, the tools you're using, these utilities, is the Power Platform.
Exactly, and the pluggable nature of that can't be overlooked. And like I said, it's all about reuse.
Absolutely.
And once you start pulling these building blocks together, I think it establishes that communication chain that you need for your employees, right? Because they want to feel safe, informed, and productive. And these are the core pieces that you need in order to do that. And all these different components start to build a solution for you to start moving forward to that goal. And I realized that, things have been up in the air over the last 3 weeks, and maybe even longer than that for some people. But, it's never too late to start communicating all these things out and finding the right platform for doing so.
And I think what's great as well is when you look at these templates and this is basically glue to kind of, it's samples of work that's been done to show you. And these things were built, it's like built in a day or less, like 2-3 hours.
All right.
These templates that basically Microsoft took some of their brightest minds and said, hey, what would you do? And boom, we have a crisis FAQ bot. Boom, we have this crisis status update app for mobile, and a news template, and so on. So, and the SharePoint site template for crisis. All these different apps are essentially, think of them as samples of what you can do, and a lot of these are very pluggable, where it's you just swap out your information or what you want to say, but just it's going to plug in the CDC Twitter feed, or it's going to plug in news locations that basically roll up things that can help employees be informed. And it makes it, not only does it make it seem like you guys know what you're doing, but it also is very empowering to then know what to do next.
That's right. It gets you so much further faster. So where you can concentrate on the things that you need to concentrate on, like extending what's already there, versus trying to come up with a solution from scratch or using the wrong thing for the wrong job.
Absolutely. Some great things. It's all about ideas, I think. It's about inspiring.
Exactly. And we'll have another slide here and some reference notes as far as, the extent to which Microsoft's really pushing out a lot of those management templates for not just Crisis, but for the Power Platform in general. But yeah, so as far as these things go, you really have a few different places to really enforce some order and help when it comes to crisis and remote work, right? We're always scrambling. We're always trying to make sure that our employees are in a safe space. But from an organization perspective, naturally, they want to make sure that, not just work continues, but also their biggest commodity, which are their employees, are safe and informed. I keep using that word, but it's the most important part of this. And they also want to make sure that any change that is done in order to help everyone is minimally impacting on their employee base, right? Because those employees have two different things they have to worry about, which is, of course, maintaining the status quo potentially or something near it for their teams that they are either reporting into or are reporting into them, and of course keeping their loved ones safe and a regular, somewhat standard schedule just for sanity's sake, not from a matter of like, an office space kind of thing and the Lombergs and whatnot. This is more so just about keeping our own mental stability. And the way that we do that is by having some regularity and some sense of the regular with maybe some improvements if we have the opportunity. With that comes, we talked about that manager to employee relationship. Microsoft Teams is a great avenue for that. And it's not just about sending an IM or a chat to someone to make sure they're okay. It's really about jumping on video and maximizing that experience, which we'll get into how those things can be used to enhance the current situations and kind of bring a little bit of levity and a little bit more to the conversation, if you ask me. So naturally, when all these things start to happen, we want to make sure that we have a good support network for people, because often when we force people into a remote work scenario, when we're used to working out of the office, there are a few things that happen. It's a huge transition. So usually change management is a thoughtful process that we look at our stakeholder groups and we do some real digging to provide the right campaign to everyone and solve some of those niche things quickly and whatnot. When you don't have time to do that and you're more reacting than planning, it comes to the point of one, making sure that your service desk is fortified for those questions, two, being able to identify those quickly and refine your approach, and three, educating en masse, which is almost, turning that pyramid upside down to a certain extent. We're not reinventing the wheel, we're just maximizing the reach of the resources at hand. So whether you have learning pathways deployed or not, we can talk through that. Crowdsourcing for content, growing your change champions networks, all those things which we hope you already have in practice. It's just a matter of taking those everyday things and expanding them just a little bit to get a lot more value out of them.
And let me jump in here on this one. I think what I find is if you can just dig into your analytics a little bit, it can help you figure out you have champions already, you just don't realize it.
Yep.
And I think often digging into some of the analytics to find out who are the people who are having success with the platform, and then being able to communicate to them and saying, hey, would you be willing to help other people who are struggling in your same department, or however you want to divide it up. That idea of being able to find ways to scale, because service desk is obviously inundated with requests, and I can't imagine how overloaded they are right now. And so find ways of kind of helping them scale and helping your team scale will it's those things really mean the difference between success and failure. I find the customer service just goes way up when you can actually spend the time you need.
Definitely so. And when it comes to those champions, we'll have an accelerating adoption change management webinar coming up soon. But really, just keep in mind that there are the advocates, right, and the enthusiastic folks, and there are also just some of those groundswell, professionals that you may need to win over to your side, right? Just like mentoring, some are more organic than formal mentors. So you have to make sure that you're bringing in both sides of that equation in order to round out the approach. All right, we can't talk about this stuff without talking about security. It's a huge piece. I don't want to drain any of this stuff, but really it just comes down to if you're going to have a good employee experience, especially in a remote work scenario. Now, this goes for every day, but when it comes to remote work, it's even more important. And it's classic stuff that we always deal with every internet project, every digital workplace project. Always comes down to what are people trying to accomplish when they, from a self-service perspective. So this could be time reporting, expenses, benefits, pay stubs, your W-2s, all when it comes to employee self-service, to, of course, getting help from the service desk like we talked about. Do I need VPN to access any of those kinds of services, right? Or do we have more of an Azure-based solution via Azure app proxy or something to that effect? My customer relationship management tool, my ERP tools, and other communication and community things are all assets that I need to be productive. So how accessible are they when I'm at home? And are we doing the right thing?
Yeah, and I find as well, a lot of customers may not realize, but a lot of all your Microsoft tools here as part of M365 also integrate with your other single sign-on platforms. Like if you're using Okta,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Your MFA solutions do integrate. The other part of it is, a lot of customers say, "Oh, well, Microsoft's not as secure as our data center." And absolutely, I would nearly authoritatively say, think again. The solutions that Microsoft has built around protection for information for the cloud, it's really quite the stack. When you start talking about the Azure AD app proxy for being able to basically secure your users, which acts a lot like an Okta. It basically gives you that single sign-on type of experience for both your, even being able to proxy for internal applications. And there's gateways even for being able to support the Power Platform along with that.
That's right. And then you have conditional access, which helps you to manage all of that from first line workers all the way up to information workers and executives. And there's a whole suite of tools. There's a quick reference here. And of course, we'll provide these slides later.
Yeah, as an example, somebody is logging in from the wrong location. You can find out, hey, we don't even have an office in this location, and this person's doing some heavy downloading. That conditional access can give you a lot of insight, but also even just being able to block it. You can basically block, grant, or require MFA based on where they're at.
That's right. And quick plug, if you want to know more about the security suite and how that can help you with remote work, we do have a webinar for that coming up next week. And we can't get out of, security without talking about Microsoft Teams and how important it is to it. And I know that Joel was talking a lot about that a second ago from a compliance perspective and overall security, whether you're connecting and securing the content to when and who can see it, making sure that we're taking advantage of some of the features such as, fast travel calculation. So if my identity gets compromised and I logged in Atlanta and suddenly 5 minutes later, someone's logging into it from, China or the UK or somewhere, we have, the stop gaps there in order to police that and shut that down via the security suite. And I'm working backwards on this slide, but naturally it starts with your core governance, right? Naming policies to make things easier, guest access for coordinating with partners and people outside your organization, as well as inside, creation and expiry of your teams themselves, email integration, the apps you use, what is going to be your overall policy for those things, and of course for your meetings, and on and off network access, which goes back to the security piece as well.
Yeah, and one thing I can't emphasize enough is that people who just assume that the default must be good because Microsoft's probably already hardened it or already locked it down.
Sure.
That's far from the truth. I mean, as an example, if you start using Teams, by default, people can share credit cards on Teams. People can share driver's licenses and IDs on Teams, on email, on SharePoint. If you spend a little bit of time figuring out your DLP process, you're going to be able to essentially keep yourself much more compliant. You can add, maybe there are certain places where HR needs to store those things. You need to essentially plan. And this is also where teams like ours can help you out in terms of just being able to give you some hints along the way, or whether it's a quick start or something like that, to be able to help you navigate through this. Because this isn't, I mean, like, I can't emphasize enough that idea that if you think you're just going to spin this up and be good to go, there's a lot of mistakes that are made in just assuming that it's configured by default in a secure way, where yes, the perimeters are secured, you do need to be able to log in, but there's a lot of, people on the inside that can just do stupid things, where if you set up some controls, you can protect yourself from a lot of liability.
Exactly what we found is, you read the white papers and whatnot all the time, that a high percentage of your security breakdowns really come from inside the organization versus outside of it. So you really want to fortify and start with your core governance pieces, but then grow over time and don't just set it and forget it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as an example, somebody's downloading large amounts of data, and they're the janitor or whatever. You want to know these things, and it can give you those kinds of insights.
Exactly right. And so then that's how we kind of fortify our house first, right? Because those types of things affect all of our users. But now let's talk about Microsoft Teams and how we can use it to improve our scenario and maybe make better use of some negative solutions, or at least negative circumstances when it comes to remote work. Because as we're introducing all of this change, we have to make sure we keep a thumb on this, right? So when it comes to, effective remote work, getting started, it starts with your workplace, right? And improving it incrementally. You're not going to have the perfect setup with your moving desk and 8-monitor control center. It may not even be a natural thing or even something you really want. But keep in mind that as you learn what makes you productive at home versus in the office, you can start to grow that over time. I realize you go to Amazon, you can't find any cameras, you can't find some of the microphones and stuff, but just grow that over time. It's not a matter of building Rome overnight. The next thing, of course, you want to communicate early and often when it comes to Teams. I really like to use video, and often if you're the person using video, it will inspire others to do the same, which is a really key thing, because it's very easy to get locked into the I don't want to share, either facial stuff or want to multitask when I'm on a call, things like that. But what we also notice over Perficient is that when we have video calls, people are more present in them. And that is something you really can't measure until after you've actually communicated and after the meeting itself. And the thing you have to look out for, of course, is that you want to maintain healthy boundaries. You want to take mental breaks when you're working from home, grab meals, have times to reset. You're working from home, so sometimes you can even go for a walk and other things during your calls, right? But we have to make sure that we're being productive at the same time and we're using that flexibility in the right ways. However, having that availability to us should be taken advantage of versus thinking that we're locked into, our desk, ushered into or shooed back into the corner somewhere.
Absolutely. And I find as well, this Teams first approach,
Yep.
What's great about Teams is it's really integrated into the rest of the tools. So if you're sharing a file with somebody, it automatically goes into your OneDrive. You're sharing a file with your team, it automatically goes into SharePoint. And before long, we'll have the Yammer community right there, right on top for that all employee communication. So it's that integration of tasks and teamwork. It really is a great way to approach remote work in a huge way.
That's right. And when it comes to remote work as well, we want to make sure that we're not missing hallway talk. You can have those same conversations via video, maybe after the meeting as needed, or catch ups, or maybe even having, I've seen my wife who is a teacher, and all the teachers are having a lunch bunch meeting, right, on Teams, and communicating out what's happened via the teaching day, because school isn't canceled. It's just been moved to a new platform and a new medium. So they still have to do some of these things, and that's forcing change in the educational side of things, which is awesome. But try bringing your lunches online, your one-on-one check-ins. I've even seen things like happy hours and whatnot, which we all have opinions of those things, but regardless, it's a platform, so let's use it to stay connected versus not. The
Yeah.
other causational thing before you start, Joel, is that every team comes with a general channel. I really like for people to keep that channel clean and have it as a good landing point, introducing people to the team, what it's for, and how to act within the team itself, versus dumping all of our contacts and information into it, because it should be relevant to everyone. Go ahead, Joel.
And actually, my suggestion was around channels as well, where having that casual channel inside your team is a really good way as well. Like basically, you're encouraging people to use the Giphies, encouraging people to express themselves with emoticons,
Right.
encouraging people to be more open and casual on that. Like having a special channel for that is a good way to kind of to be able to get more of that hallway talk type of social experience.
Exactly.
People being able to use their personalities a little bit.
That's right, because a lot gets lost in translation, to your point, right? So when you have GIFs and whatnot, and we always joke that there's no sarcasm font to things, right? And it's very easy to interpret and take things in a negative slant. So yeah, feel free to work out loud, and you definitely want to talk and communicate in a way that kind of replaces your hallway version of things, and live meetings, of course, and video and GIFs and all those things help with that. So when it comes to working from home, when we talked about making the most out of meetings, be the leader when it comes to video. Don't follow everyone's example just because no one's using video. Be that person. Be the first if you can. I realize that the internet and our bandwidth is taking a hit at this time because we're all forced into these situations. But use as much as you can possibly. Use the meeting notes feature to track action items and whatnot. And you also want to make sure that you have your own experience. If you can change your picture to something that's more reflective of your personality that day, or something more inspiring to others, do that, because that goes a long way too. And you really don't know who you're affecting, but working out loud can have emotional benefits that you may not be considering. You also want to make sure that you whiteboard when you can, because like we said, a lot's being shared via voice, but we don't always share our reactions to things via video, and we don't always whiteboard as much as we used to because there's not one apparently available, but you have that within Teams. So let's make sure that we use that piece of the functionality as well to communicate key facts, because the worst thing you can do is have a meeting, invest an hour, and get nothing out of it because of simple communication breakdowns. All right, we talked about live events. You're on one right now. I think we can probably move forward because I realize we may have some Q&A at the end of this, but you really, as an admin and both a user, you want to make sure that you kind of levy out what should be a Teams meeting, what should be a live event. Largely, the keys are in the table here, right? So if you have more of a town hall experience, live events are great for that. If you have more than 250 attendees, which I realize some of this stuff is getting moved up via thresholds and Teams now, you definitely want to take advantage of the live event platform. You can even back that live event platform with Q&A via Twitter if you'd like, and some other areas for like live metrics and whatnot to track drop off. But also you can take advantage of some of the more robust services when it comes to video processing and some of the other things on the back end to provide a rich professional experience and output at the end of the day. We talked about Teams templates and the apps for Microsoft Teams. There's a whole host of them. Please take a look at some of the URLs in the resources section, because really it varies from the people manager network, which we talked about earlier when it comes to, talking to your employees, all the way down to, crowdsourcing information via bots and expert finders, icebreakers, and other things to keep us connected. And of course, FAQ and other communication aspects. We talked about the Power Platform. This is really where you shine and start transforming your business when it comes to Microsoft Teams, as well as the things that you used to do with InfoPath, all the way up to corporate solutions. All those things are really well done within the Power Platform, and it provides a lot of your folks that are normally, process experts to start dabbling around and become a power user. And with a little bit of help and know-how, they can start building solutions, whether it's visualizations or actual applications, automation routines, and other things via virtual agents that can help you to build solutions that can help your enterprise. And we also have some examples over here on the right side. So governance is always a heavy thing. There are always going to be governance concerns for each piece of the suite that we talked about, from Microsoft Teams to live events within Teams. SharePoint and OneDrive can't be ignored. Even if we're talking about Teams, we still have to secure our house, and that's part of that. Our foundations and security pieces are always going to be a concern naturally. And of course, the Power Platform and making sure that we have a good plan for preventing sprawl across all these different things are super important. Overall, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We do have 2 more sessions coming up. The first of which is Microsoft 365 security for remote work. Mark Doberstein, Joel, and I will be talking about some key things that you want to keep in mind when reassessing your remote work setup. Next comes accelerating adoption change management for remote work. How can we supercharge the adoption of these things that you're investing in? We really want you to register for our Team Summit, which has gone virtual. So we're opening up admission to everyone. It was originally going to be just in Minneapolis, but now it's open to everyone. It should be a full day of education from adoption change management all the way down to how to best migrate from Skype to Teams and some of those other areas. Joel's really been leading the charge on that particular event, and we're getting a lot of good feedback on that. Register now on Eventbrite.
Yeah, I do feel like these team summits we've been doing, which are basically a full day focused just on Teams, we've covering it from compliance and adoption, talking about this work from home stuff, and even kind of digging into the vision and strategy for Teams in your organization, driving digital transformation. There's a number of different ways we kind of looked at this, partnering with Microsoft at MTCs, and now moving this to online. I think there's a great opportunity to even share this message even broader and get more companies that are distributed or that aren't in just one location who can join up and compare notes. It's a great opportunity, I think, to connect with other people who are like-minded, and I think that that's going to be our challenge as well, is how to best connect people who are on here along the way.
Exactly, and always check into our COVID-19 hub on Perficient.com. It provides insights into industry norms that we're seeing, as well as material from all of our strategic experts and whatnot, and of course our thriving blog community. All right, I think that's going to wrap us up, Joel. I mean, I don't know if you have any questions.
I do see a question here.
Okay, awesome. Go for it.
It says, what do you recommend for getting started with Teams? So this is somebody, it sounds like what they're using Exchange and SharePoint, but haven't gotten started with Teams. They're wondering what's a good way to get started. What's the approach? What's the first step?
Yeah, definitely. I think that one, the Teams first approach to 365 is really what we're seeing now. Setting up that hub. I know we have an offering for Teams in 10 days, right? So if you have your email set up and you're using SharePoint and OneDrive in any type of limited capacity, we can supercharge that and get you rolling in Teams within 2 weeks, right? But theoretically, or just from an overall perspective, you want to start either, giving everyone the tool set as a baseline as far as how we communicate via chat, IM, and meetings, right? Because then you're making like more of a tool play, or you can take it up a notch and start talking about how we collaborate together. What are the processes I really want to see teams beneficial in, and start there from more of a use case perspective. Both of these things are, good approaches. It really just depends on how your organization works, culture, and some of those other softer dependencies. What do you think, Joel?
I think as well that people shouldn't be afraid of Teams. It's a great way to kind of tip your toe in Office 365 and kind of see the power of the cloud. I do think that there's a few things that you need to kind of understand how your business works and apply that, and understand even from that, like I mentioned, the DLP, like the data loss prevention. I do think that it's helpful to have a consultant or somebody you can reach out to if you're using this for the first time. But these quick starts where it's like, hey, I just want to be able to reach out to somebody, getting a bucket of hours or something, where if you get stuck, if you're in a depending on the size of your organization, there's going to be different practices that you might take. For larger enterprises, I think there does need to be a prescriptive approach. And I'm seeing another question here that actually relates to what we're talking about, which is somebody takes the total opposite approach. And this question is, what do we do if we haven't been officially doing Teams, but we have been doing Teams because we didn't turn it off?
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to one, getting a clear message from corporate sometimes, right? But you can also affect change on a department by department or team by team basis, right? Because there's a lot that happens from a groundswell perspective. And to be honest, those companies are in the best position to supercharge that and, take it corporate wide. Because if you're using Teams kind of under the radar, kind of sort of, that means you have a lot of cool stories and a lot of good reasons to go back to it and a lot to evangelize. So one, formalize some of that process. There's another guide for getting the most from an end user perspective out of Teams that we posted maybe last year, and that has an outline for a case study for each one. And I realize that's a little bit more work than just having a conversation with someone about Teams, but you can use that and sell it to other users and start to tell that story more, because your groundswell is only going to stop when you stop evangelizing. So one, you kind of need a megaphone, which is what the case study's for. But two, you can also make sure that you can capitalize on some of those gaps and start to fill them when it comes to your employee experience and evangelizing that too.
Yeah, I absolutely think that this is one where things quickly get out of control if you haven't been managing it, but that doesn't mean shut it off. It really does mean embrace those who've been finding value and find ways of kind of reining it in from a governance perspective, but it doesn't mean just shutting it off by any means.
Exactly.
And it looks like we're out of time.
Yep.
I appreciate being able to be here with the community and everybody on. Fantastic information. Thanks a lot, Ron, for helping guide us through this. And yeah, feel free to reach out. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe and stay healthy out there, everyone.
Thanks for joining today's webinar. As a reminder, you will receive a copy of the recording of today's presentation, along with a link to the slides within the next few business days. We thank you again for joining us and have a great day.